Hey, what's going on, everybody? And welcome back to episode 5 of Wrestling with Tomorrow. I am your host, Mike Kinney, and it is my pleasure to be with you today. We are in the midst of Halloween season, which is, again, I've talked about this numerous times just on this podcast alone, but to be honest with you, I get crazy about it. Fall colors, corn mazes, all that fun stuff that really leads up to the day of the year, October 31st and Halloween. We were doing a little costume shopping with my kids earlier today, and boy, I'm telling you, if you haven't already gotten out there to get some costumes, you better hurry because things are getting picked over. We're going to end up finding ourselves ordering some stuff online just because, honestly, we waited too long. And we've already been to the Halloween stores like 4 times, and we just couldn't commit. So lots of choices out there. But this will be the first year that my daughter, who is now officially in high school, she will not be trick-or-treating. She's actually going to be handing out candy at my house. So we always decorate for Halloween at my house. And then like on Halloween day, I can't turn on any of the lights or any of the decorations because then people think that we're handing out candy. And we haven't been because my kids haven't, they've always been the trick-or-treat age. So yeah, this will be cool though this year. Everything gets to be on. I'm going to buy up a bunch of candy. Her and her friends are going to hang out, watch some horror movies while my wife and I will take our boys out trick-or-treating out on the town here. So in our neighborhood that we have does really, really good. It's always super busy. And like the first couple of years we lived here, and I don't even think it's slowed down since then, but it almost looks like something right out of a movie, like that busy. The kids running around, and it's pretty cool. So, like I said, very excited for this Halloween season. You know, if you want to talk horror movies a little bit too, I'm extremely excited for. There's a lot of new stuff coming out on Netflix right now. There's one that's coming out with one of the Wayans brothers. The Curse of something hollow, Bridge Hollow, or anyway, essentially every Halloween decoration comes alive and tries to kill everybody. Right up my alley, folks. Looks awesome. And of course, Halloween Ends is coming out as well. So this should be the final entry into the Halloween franchise that supports the Jamie Lee Curtis angle, I guess. Not totally sure, but let's be honest, none of these movies are ever going to stop getting made because they all make a pile of money and they're going to live on forever. But if you think about that, Friday the 13th, we haven't had a Friday the 13th movie since 2009. This is the longest run from movie to movie that in between each Friday the 13th movie, this is the longest lull they've ever had. So at this point, it's 2022. 13 years since we've had a Friday the 13th film? So, hey, see, that's why I should look. 13 years, Friday the 13th. They missed a perfect opportunity. Golly, I'm telling you, perfect opportunity for some marketing. I think they missed the ball on that one. But anyway, I also checked out. So some of you may or may not know, I'm a huge Rob Zombie fan. I always have been. I'm just super into his artistic ability and the constant fact that he's always touring. He's always got a project going on. I admire him very much. Not the greatest movie maker though. All right. I'm going to say that right out of the gate. His first 2 movies, House of a Thousand Corpses and Devil's Rejects, I loved them. Those 2 are great. And I think that they hold up really well. The horror community really gathers around those movies. I mean, they really are good films. Now, everything after that has been a dumpster fire. His newest film is the first movie he's ever done that's rated PG. Everything else has been R-rated, at a minimum R-rated. So I knew he was a big Monsters fan, and I was really hoping that he was going to do the Monsters right. You know, like reboot them, do something. The first mistake he made, he casted his wife as the lead for Lily Munster. I mean, she is not a good actress at all, and she is in the forefront of every one of his movies, and that stuff needs to stop because dang. And I think honestly, I couldn't finish the Monsters movie, and I'll tell you why. It's too long. It's almost 2 hours long, and I believe it's on Netflix right now. So if you want to check it out, by all means. artistically, the visuals of the movie are really, really cool. It's very colorful. The costumes are great. The plot is horrid. I mean, it is a horrible movie. Of course, we have his wife up front, and then he cast about 5 people to play multiple roles. So he would just throw makeup on one of them, and they would play another character, his wife included. She played some news anchor, and yeah, it's just what a bummer. I couldn't finish the movie. That's the first Rob Zombie movie that I've never actually sat all the way through and finished, and I'm not planning to. I did buy the Blu-ray because I want to sit down and there's a director's commentary, so he'll sit there and he'll talk about, the ins and outs of the movie, making it and things like that. I'll watch it with the commentary on here at some point, probably in the wintertime when I've got nothing else to do. But I can't sit through that to try to actually enjoy that movie. And I always give him benefit of the doubt. I really, really do. But man, stop making movies, please. Just go back to making music full time. Movies just aren't Rob Zombie's thing. And that hurts me to say, because I really am a huge fan. So, but hey, if I was doing something that people didn't like, if I was trying to fix your car and messing it up every single time, you'd say, Mike, stop being a mechanic and just go back to making a podcast or doing whatever other things you're doing, writing books. Just don't fix cars because you're not good at it. Tough love, folks. Tough love. All right. So happy Halloween, everybody. My guest today is a really, really good friend of mine. I met him a few years back, and we get into the background of that. And I really am excited to be able to share his journey with you. Now, again, keep in mind, everybody that I interview on this podcast is for a very specific reason. Some of them, frankly, just have had to overcome so much adversity, and I want to know how they did it. And are there tools that they used that all of us listening and watching can use in our everyday life? Hans has got this exceptional story, and I often joked with him about how he literally has lived in the American dream, like the cliche American dream. It's totally him, an immigrant story, a couple of times, to be honest with you. We'll get into the minutia of all of that, but really, good friend of mine, continues to be. I knew that I had to have his story on here. It's so good, and he's such a great person, and I hope that comes through in the interview a little bit, because really, good people are hard to find, and Hans he's good people. So I hope you enjoy the interview. Here it is, my interview with Hans Anderson. Well, Hans Anderson is with me, ladies and gentlemen, and a dear friend of mine, and we're going to get into that in just a second. But first of all, I just want to say thank you for finally agreeing to be with me on this episode of my podcast.
No, I'm happy to be here. Thanks for inviting me. This is pretty cool.
So what I want to do is I want to introduce you, but I want you to do it. So, because you can do a better job at it. So introduce yourself and really let these listeners and viewers know how you and I met.
Yeah, sure. So like Mike said, my name is Hans Anderson. Nothing really, don't really have a claim to fame per se. So other than who I am, I'm a friend of Mike's. Mike and I met, I want to say, the beginning part of 2020, so about 2 years ago. And we met through UPS. And since then, we've both changed jobs, and neither of us are there anymore. We both still enjoy our time at UPS and love it, but we've moved on from UPS, but not from each other.
Yeah, and we should be clear. We met through UPS, but not because somebody delivered a package to the other person. It was because we both worked there as salespeople. And I'm trying to remember. I think at the time I was leading a sales team, and you were moving back to the United States from Australia. And we'll get to all of that in just a bit. But you had began working in the hub at UPS, and they quickly realized that you've got a management skill about you. And they moved you to sales. And so I believe at that time you began working on my team because I had an open spot. So you were really helping me out while they trained you in sales. So you were helping me with my open territory. And that's really, I think, how the relationship began. Is that right?
That's right. Yeah, I was working with another friend of ours, and I was in one of the, what do you call it? One of those um, temporary positions, waiting
Yeah.
for a permanent spot. And you had somebody that was got a permanent spot covering the Duluth area, and they were just going to go to their training, and so I was going to cover for 6 weeks while they're doing some training.
Yeah. And it's just like anything in life. And it's where, like, we knew pretty quickly that we were kindred spirits, you and I, and we got along extremely well, and we've stayed connected along the way. But here's the key elements to this. You have such a great background and a great story. And when we look at the overarching theme, especially for this season 1, for this podcast, it really has to do a lot with managing change and chasing a dream and having to pivot along the way. And frankly, you exemplify all of that. And the guests that I'm having on this podcast don't have to have been in any kind of spotlight per se, but their background needs to make sense enough to bring on here and just help these listeners and viewers have the opportunity to listen to different people and how they've managed change. And I think that's so incredibly important. And you have a history of having done that and having done it very well. And so it would be a crime for us not to exploit that information for my following here. So go ahead.
No, I was just going to say for sure. And it's funny, like when I think of it myself, I don't see it. But then if I talk to somebody like yourself, then you see it. And so then I hear it from your point of view, and I'll go, oh, I guess, yeah, you're probably right. There has been a lot of change in my life. But it's something that you kind of only notice if you look at it in hindsight, if that makes sense.
Yeah, probably. Between that and you being very modest, I think that's a recipe
Totally.
for what we're looking at here. Yeah, yeah. And I also want everybody to know, so as I have been navigating change since you and I have met, you have been this constant Jiminy Cricket to me. You've been like my conscience. You've been someone that I can rely on, especially when I'm making decisions professionally. You've certainly been someone that's been in my corner all along the way, and it's really meant a lot to me. And so it's just a great honor to finally have you on this show. And let's dive in. What do you say?
Sounds good. Let's do it.
All right, so let's start from the beginning, as any story happens. Where are you from? Where did you grow up? What was your childhood like?
Yeah, so I actually grew up about 30 miles north of Salt Lake, in a city called Kaysville. Funny enough, my parents grew up there, and my grandma grew up there. And so, like, my grandma went to the same high school as my parents, and my older sister, went to the same high school as my parents and my grandma. And right after her senior year, we moved to Minnesota. So my sister's senior year, my dad got a new job out in Minneapolis, and he would spend 10 days in Minneapolis and then fly back to Utah for 3 or 4. And he did that for 9 months. And I did that. He did that when I was in 8th grade, and so that my sister could finish her senior year. And then when I was 14, we drove out to Minnesota. And that was before the time of Snapchat and Instagram and Facebook. And so, like, I didn't really keep in touch with many of my friends. Like, we moved, and I just made completely new friends because I couldn't Snapchat and Instagram them and tell them what was happening.
Yeah.
So that's my childhood. That's like, I grew up on one. I could walk one way 15 minutes to my mom's parents, the other way 15 minutes to my dad's parents. I grew up in the same small town as both my grandparents. All of my cousins were in the same county or the next county over. And then when I was 14, we moved 21 hours away. And so all of a sudden, I wasn't near my grandparents or my cousins. And the other thing to add to that, as Mike knows, faith is a big thing for me. And I'm a member of the Church of Jesus Christ of Latter-day Saints. And at that time, growing up in school, like 9 out of 10 kids were members of the Church of Jesus Christ of Latter-day Saints. Flip it, move to Minnesota, maybe 1 out of 10 kids is that. So that was another big change for me too. So there were a few changes. So then
So hold on, I'm going to slow you down because this is a huge deal. You're literally picking up and moving halfway across the country, and in an age that is. So, were you in ninth grade? I'm going to guess eighth, ninth grade.
Yeah, we moved the summer after my 8th grade year.
Okay, so going into high school is a tough age. Walk me through what was going through your mind and how you adapted. Certainly within that first, I don't know, 6 months or so. What was that? What was that like for you?
So my dad and I were actually pretty excited. Um, and I kind of struggled in 7th and 8th grade. So I was kind of ready for a change and I was kind of excited. Um, I don't know about my siblings, but personally, my dad and I were like, hey, this is good. This is going to be fun. And I met some boys through my youth group when I moved to Minnesota. Like this is when I was 14. I'm now 42. I had both of them over for dinner the past month. One lives in Arizona, one lives in Washington, and they were both. I'm still friends with them today. And this was after I moved to Minnesota. So change can be hard, but like I loved it. It was great.
Good. You get through high school. And you went to the same high school for 4 years, I'm assuming.
Now, funny enough, I went
Okay.
to I went to Nicollet Junior High for 9th grade, and we were on the border of our school district. And I had I had some church friends at Prior Lake, and so I said, "Mom, I'd rather go to Prior Lake." And she's like, "Well, you just started here, and this school is going to take you to Burnsville, and you have friends there." I go, "Nope, don't want to go there." So I went from 8th grade in Utah to 9th grade at one junior high, then to Prior Lake High, and so I spent 3 years in Prior Lake and then graduated.
Okay. What did you do right after high school?
So I finished high school in June, and in September I was called on a mission for our church, and I went to serve my 2-year mission in Southern California in Anaheim.
Okay.
So I was there for 2 years.
Big change.
Yep.
What was the most helpful thing that you were experiencing to help you get through some of that change?
Um, I guess maybe even just the fact that we were always with a partner or companions, as we call them on our mission, and so I was never really alone. I only had 2 companions longer than 6 weeks. Other than that, I always had a new companion every 6 weeks. So I was always getting to know somebody different and living with them and being with them, and so you just have to learn to cope and adapt and just learn about new people.
Okay. Keep going. Did you go to college at this time? No, you didn't, right?
No, I didn't. So I finished my 2-year mission in 2001, and I met a girl on my mission, and we kept in touch with letters, and then I finished my mission in August, and in December I flew out to Australia where this girl was that I met, and proposed to her. And
All right, hold on. This is a big part of the story. So you meet a girl she was doing her mission as well, right? So that you met her around the same time in the United States.
Correct.
And she was from Australia, come here to
Yep.
do that piece. So, obviously there was some attraction there, and things begin to move forward. But moving to a different country is not the same as moving from Utah to Minnesota.
Yeah, but I didn't move to a different country at that time.
You didn't? Okay.
No. So at that time, like we had just finished our missions. We had only like written to each other in letters, and we knew that like we liked each other.
Okay.
Like when I say liked each other, we didn't discuss anything further than, hey, how are you? Because we were pretty focused on missionary work.
Sure.
in our letters. And I finished, and she came out to see me and my family, and then I went out and saw her and her family. And then about a year later, we got married in Minnesota, and we lived in Minnesota for about 3 years.
Oh, okay.
But then after we got married and lived here, we were probably here for 2.5 years, and I could kind of tell she was missing home and she was missing family. And I was young. I was 25, and I thought, Australia, I've been there a few times now with my wife and for other things. And like when you're a kid and you read National Geographic or you read about other countries, Australia is always one of those cool places that you'd be like, ooh, I want to live there. They've got some weird animals. Or,
Kangaroos and koalas, man. It's got to be cool, right?
yeah, yeah. And so I was like young, 25, and thought, man, that would be fun. That'd be an adventure. And so I told her, I said, let's live there. And I applied for like a permanent residency because she was already a citizen. And then it was granted like really fast. And so then we moved there we'd been married 3 years, just over 3 years. And we moved there at the end of 2005.
Did you have any children at that time?
One.
So, okay.
So we had a 2-year-old.
A 2-year-old. Also a change, by the way. If you're listening out there and you've never had children, let me just tell you something. Your whole life changes when you have kids, believe it or not. So, okay, now you're in Australia, right? And talk to me about maybe the first 6 months, because it's a different culture, right? It's similar, but it's a different place. And you're away from your family. And just walk me through some of what was going through your mind during that time.
Yeah, so it's like you said, it's very similar to the fact that they like a lot of US pop culture and they like a lot of that. Other than that, like everything else is different. And funny enough, Mike, one of the constants and the similar things in Australia. So the day I got back from my honeymoon, I started a job as a loader at UPS. So I was loading at UPS, and I started that like right when we got back from our honeymoon, and I did that for 3 years. And the only reason I stopped doing that was because we moved to Australia. And then when we moved there, I connected with UPS, and I worked there for about 4 months. However, the only reason I left that was because all they had me doing was unloading air cans at 4 o'clock in the morning. And I thought, I can't keep doing this, guys.
Yeah.
But in saying that, for like 4 to 6 months, I still had UPS, which was something I had there. The other constant I had was my wife and my daughter. And then I knew her family and I met people from church. Other than that, we lived in a small 1-bedroom, I want to say apartment, but it wasn't an apartment. My in-laws have like a small 1-bedroom house in their backyard. Okay. And so we lived in that. And my wife tells me that I was probably depressed, but I didn't see it until after she pointed it out to me. But it probably got to that point because we were there for almost 2 years, and I didn't expect to be in that house for 2 years.
Sure. Yeah.
So
how did you cope? When she points out the fact that you were depressed, how do you think, looking back on that you were coping with that at the time?
I don't know. I just look at life and think, hey, one step forward.
Sure.
She says that, but at the same time, I remember having conversations with my mother-in-law, and my mother-in-law saying, you're really positive. I never hear you complain. I never hear you get upset. You're very positive for what you're going through. So, yeah, look, I just tried to think, if I can't control it, what's there to complain about?
Sure.
But I can control it. So I just need to be able to be positive about what I'm doing.
It's a good way to live, to be honest with you. Your blood pressure is probably really low because of it.
So one time I was working at a company called TNT in Australia. They're the same type of company as UPS. And I had a really good friend. And my manager called me the low reactor. And he was the high reactor. And my manager says to me, he says, one of your customers could be ready to leave or they could be falling apart. And I'd ask you about them and you'd say, oh yeah, Jeff, they're doing great. They're fine. And he says, your friend here, he says, nothing could be wrong with his customer and the world will be falling apart.
Yeah, I get that. I'm probably closer to the high reactor level. So I totally get where he's coming from.
Yeah, I'm a low reactor.
You definitely are. All right. So how long did you live in Australia?
We lived there for 15 years.
15 years. So, okay. And you had a couple more kids along the way, right?
We had 3 more.
3 more. So 15 years and 4 kids later, you eventually decided to go back to the United States.
Which in and of itself was a process, because I think probably even 5 years or 6 years into it, I was trying to get my wife to come back. If you ask my wife, she would probably tell you the day I got there, I was trying to get back, which isn't true. But Sydney's expensive, and it was always hard to get ahead. And so, you talk about that American dream. One of the things that my mother-in-law always wanted for us was to own a home and to get a little bit more financially secure, which we were always chasing our tails in Australia trying to do that. And so that was one of my main motivations or pushes to move back. But my wife didn't want to. And so we came to visit my family in 2019 in, I want to say, yeah, it would have been the end of July through August, because I remember we were here for my wife's birthday. And my father-in-law says to my wife before we left, he says, "What if you get an impression that you need to live there?" My wife says, "Well, that's not going to happen. That's not true." And he says, "Well, what if you feel that?" She's like, "Well, I'll tell them that it's wrong. Whatever impression it is, I'll say, nope, that's wrong." Well, funny enough, my wife did have that impression. And when we came back, she said, "We need to move there. I don't know why, but we need to live there." And that was the first time she said that. So I grabbed a hold of that and I took it 110%. And I was like, we're going. And so from the time we were on holiday in August and we got back, we didn't want to tell her parents right away, because the first Sunday in September is Father's Day in Australia. It's not in June, it's in September. So she didn't really want to tell her dad on Father's Day, "Hey, Dad, just letting you know I'm going to move." So we waited till after Father's Day, and then we told them, and then we bought a ticket for me, and then I quit my job, and then October 24th, which is like 2 months later, I moved to Minnesota. And I moved without my family, and my wife and I were maybe more presumptuous than we should have been. And we thought, it'll take a month or 2, 3 months, and Hans will find a job. And once I do that, then I'll say, "Hey, wife, I got a job. I found a place to live. Let's get some tickets and have the kids come out."
I love that part of the story because, and you're right, there's such an American dream element to it. And that's one of the things I wanted to emphasize here is if you really do think about this, you've been away for so long, but you created something away from the United States, and you were trying to, ideally you were trying to find a better life for your family, not any different than any immigrants did in the early days of the United States. This whole country was built on immigration. And that's the American dream, is to be able to move here and do better for your children and your family. And so when I think about that, and here you are coming back with, your wife's Native Australian, and now you've got 3 children that were born there, and a 4th that was born in the States, but you're really just making it happen and trying to find work and grow your family and do what's right for them. The other thing I want to talk about, and I don't want to make this about me, but it's my podcast and I can do whatever I want.
Please do.
The element of you leaving everything behind and finding work before you bring your family. I don't even know if I've ever told you this before, but I was born in Iowa. All right. And I eventually moved to Minnesota and ended up growing. I'm still in Minnesota. I've grown up here most of my life. We moved here when I was about 5 or 6 years old. My dad worked for Hormel Foods, the company that makes the best canned lunch meat in the world, my friend, known as Spam.
Yep.
He worked at a plant in southern Iowa in a town called Ottumwa, which we live just outside of it. And the Hormel strike happened, and my dad was never, he never crossed the picket line. He went and found work while everybody else was on strike, and away from that, I don't want to say the word scab, but I don't know how else to say it. My dad was not a scab, and he was very proud of that. So he found other work. Eventually, at the end of the strike, that plant closed. And they looked at all these guys that still wanted to come back after all of that. And they said, "Look, you guys can either move to Atlanta, Georgia, or you can move to Austin, Minnesota," which is where their corporate office was. So my dad left us behind, my mom and me and my newborn sister. Well, he moved to Minnesota and began working, and he lived with some friends and just started saving up money, and eventually found us an apartment so that we could all be together less than a year later. I tell that story because it's so similar to how you did things, and I have so much respect for it, because I remember what it was like missing my dad, going through that as a kid. No doubt your family missed you, but as a kid, I also knew that he was doing it for the betterment of the family. And so I just sucked it up and drove on and eventually settled in, and the rest is history. So your kids were also navigating a significant amount of change. Talk to me about when you were here and they were there. How did you stay in touch? There had to have been some kind of cadence, because if I know my family, they would have been like, this time every day we are going to communicate, FaceTime, whatever it is. So talk to me just a little bit about what that was like, and what was kind of going through your mind at the time, being by yourself back here away from all of them.
Sure. So before I do that, just to back up, I think the one thing that I say is, as much as we call it the American dream, Australians will also call it the Australian dream. And I'll kind of always have this little guilty spot that we couldn't make it in Australia and that we couldn't figure it out, because my wife would always say to me, if we weren't American, we wouldn't think about going to America. If you were Australian, we would have no option, and we would just figure it out, and we'd live here. And it's true. We would have. But
the marketing works better. If you let me just push this American dream thing forward, it works a lot better.
It does. But like I said, needless to say, we're here. And so, and to add a little bit of context to what you're asking about. So when I left, my parents live here in Minnesota. So does my brother and his sister and my sister. And so I stayed with my parents. And at the time, my brother and his wife were here, and they had, it was 2 years ago, so they would have had a 6-year-old, a 2-year-old, and 2 newborn twins. So that's where I moved to. And then my wife and my 4 kids were living with her parents. And so the cadence of how we called, it's funny. I realized that my 2 oldest, who were teenagers, they really weren't good at communicating with me unless I Snapchatted them. I had never used Snapchat, and I don't anymore. But for that 7 months, I used Snapchat because that's the only way I could talk to them, because then they would Snapchat me back. And then I got streaks, which I never knew what streaks were. And then I got some streaks with my daughter. But since she's been here, I don't need them anymore because she's here. But my 2 younger kids, they were more frequent with talking to me, and they would call me on my wife's phone and call me on that way because they didn't have phones. And then as it got closer, like when we'll get into it, but as I was working night shift at UPS, on my way home, I'd call, and we would drive it on my way home, and different stuff. The cadence would change, the way we communicated would change. And sometimes it was hard to catch some of the kids because of the time zones, because it was different. They were sleeping and I was not. And
the time change is radically different, right? I mean, it's literally night and day different.
Yes. Yeah, exactly. And that's why when I was working at UPS, I would drive home at like 4:00 in the morning, and they were up, so it was perfect. Yeah. It's not ideal for me because I was awake at night, but it was ideal for them because it was the same time zone. They were awake.
Sure. And also, there's a pandemic in the middle of all of this, right?
Well, there wasn't when I left, and we didn't plan on a pandemic. I don't know anybody planned on it, but we didn't. Like I said, we thought I left at the end of October. We kind of hoped we'd be together before Christmas or after Christmas. And looking back on it, that was highly ambitious of me. And I hadn't found work at Christmas time yet. I'd had a few good interviews. I'd had a few possibilities, but I hadn't yet. So what I did was I went to UPS and I applied, and I told my wife, I said, I'm just going to load some trucks and lose some weight so that you'll like me better when you get to Minnesota and you'll think I'm 21 again. And I went and applied, and they said, we're done for Christmas. Come back January 6th. Which was okay, but I was literally crushed that I was going to miss Christmas with my family. So that was a challenging holiday. But
so you spent that Christmas by yourself, or how?
No, like I was still with my parents and my
Sure.
nieces and nephews and my brothers and sisters, but not with my own family.
Sure.
And again, because of the time zone, it's not like I could call them on Christmas because my Christmas was the day after Christmas for them.
Right. Right.
So yeah. Anyways, but yeah, so I started working at UPS, and then I was loading, and then they made me a supervisor, and then before I was only there for literally 4 weeks, 5 weeks, and they had me in sales because I told them enough times that I was better at sales than loading boxes.
It's a hard gig, man. Loading those trucks is hard.
Well, they didn't even have me load. I was a supervisor, so I was running an area, and
Well,
the guys
that's
I was
still hard. It's a big job.
The guys I was running told me they appreciated what I did in that 3 weeks. But then they put me in sales, and I found an apartment. I got our lease. We bought tickets for my family, and then that's right when the pandemic started to take a little bit of traction. And I remember just being at a fast food restaurant in the parking lot, and my wife called me and she says, "Did you hear what happened?" And I says, "What do you mean? Did I hear what happened?" And she says, "The flights out of Australia have been canceled, and our prime minister has put a travel ban on anybody leaving or coming to Australia." And I said, "That's fine." I said, "You all got U.S. passports. We made sure. You'll be fine. No problem." And I did. My heart did sink at the time, though, and I was like, "What the heck's going to happen?" So we actually we had flights with Virgin, and we canceled them. No, we didn't cancel them. We kept them because we couldn't cancel them yet, and we bought new flights with United because United's hadn't been canceled. And then in the end, they were canceled as well. And I told my wife, "You've got U.S. passports. They'll let you out. Go." She packed up the house, or as much of the house as she could. They all had 2 suitcases. I think they left my in-laws' house in shambles. And they went to the airport, and they turned them away, and they told them, "No, you can't leave." And I was like on FaceTime with all my kids while my wife was trying to talk to these Border Patrol people to leave. And it just didn't work. And so she came home, and then for the next, I want to say 3 or 4 weeks, I applied 3 different times to the Australian government. And the third time it was third time lucky. The third time I applied, it was approved that they could leave. And then we had to pick when they were going to fly out. And we picked a date that was the day before my son's birthday. And so they flew out the day before my son's birthday to be here. And they went to the airport, and the same people that stopped them from coming were still there, the same Border Patrol people. And I recognized my wife, and she said the look on their face was like, "I don't want to turn you away again." And she showed them the email, and she's like, "No, it's been approved this time." And they're like, "Okay, go, get out of here."
Yeah.
So they came out, and it ended up being 7, almost 8 months that we were apart.
I remember the day. The day they came back. In fact, I remember you saying to me, "I think I'll just go to the airport and pick them up and then just finish up work." Or I had to convince you to take time off to spend with your family. Because that's, first of all, that's just who you are. You're an extremely hard worker, but I knew you were pumped, and I was so excited for you. And I thought, man, if I was in his shoes, I know I would want to have some time off to see them again. So if he doesn't take time off, I'm going to force him out of here. Like, you just need to go. I remember telling I think it was my manager at the time. No, he wasn't. He was my former manager at the time. But you were working for him.
Yes.
And I had told him, like, "Man, we need, please, please let him, kick him out of here."
I remember calling him, and I was like, "Hey, do you think that I could take that day off?" And he's like, "Do I think you could? Yes, you should. Please take that day off."
Yeah, he was always good about that kind of stuff. But
yes, he was.
So yeah, I remember the photos, and I remember all of it. You were so excited to finally have them all back, and we were all pumped for you.
Yeah. And so to add to that, Mike, when we moved to Australia when I was 25, we really didn't have any money when we moved to Australia. And all we had money to do was to buy a new car in Australia. When we moved back from Australia to America, like I said, I had a place ready to move into. I had furnishings, I had beds, I had everything for my family set up. I had cars so that we were ready. However, the money that we had still saved, because of the pandemic, usually the Australian currency is at like around 75%. So I knew I was going to lose a quarter of my money, because when you do the exchange rate, it's only a 72% Australian. Because of the pandemic, it went down to 50. So I was going to lose half of the money. And so my dad was like, whatever you need, let me know. Don't change your money right now. And the same concept, when we had to buy tickets and a deposit and more tickets, my mom was like, what do you need? Let me buy it for you. And they did. So long story short, I meticulously made like an Excel spreadsheet of everything I owe my mom, and I paid her back everything. And we waited until it went back up to 72 before we converted our money, so we didn't lose a half of our money.
Smart.
But there was some pretty scary times, and I don't cry very often, but there was some times during that 7 months when I didn't know when I was going to see my family.
Yeah.
It was tough.
Yeah. Yeah, I do remember you didn't work for me, or we didn't work together during that entire time, but I do remember it was weighing on you. You process things a little bit different than I do externally. Again, back to that low reactor piece.
Yep.
But I could tell that you were just a little bit off, and I knew what was going on. And so I was trying to make you as comfortable working with these new people in a new territory for some, whatever reason. I was trying to keep you busy.
Well, I had, as you know, when you start a new job, you go through training.
Yeah.
And so I had 6 weeks of training, and I finished that training. And one of the comments that the trainer made back to your old manager, who was my manager at the time, was, he says, Hans was more positive than most people in the class and more participative. And he was going through this whole change and this whole process without his family. And he says, I just couldn't believe how positive and happy he was with the circumstances that he was going through. And I said, well, that's nice of him to say that.
Well, let me ask you this. Because again, you're not unlike some of these other folks that I've interviewed. You've got this personality about you that's just so incredibly calming, and it's like it draws people in. Was it just me that gets drawn in, or is it or do you have to swat people away because you draw on so many folks like a fly to a light?
I don't think that I do. Maybe I don't know. If you ask my wife, I'm not. She thinks I'm a grumpy person.
Well, I don't know about that.
But look, like I said before, at the same time as when my family was away, I was living with my parents, and I could see how my dad would navigate things versus how I would navigate things, and you could see the difference in people. And not that my dad navigates things horribly, it's just different. Because people process things differently, like you said, and people go through change different or go through things differently. And I don't know. I guess I just feel like, what's the point of being negative when you I just generally try to smile and be upbeat and happy, because I don't like being negative.
Sure. So before I dive into trying to pull some tools out of you for these followers of ours to be able to take with them and take along their own journeys, they got to hear the end of the story, because this has a happy ending. So your family comes back, you are in an apartment, and open it up for the rest of them. Let us know.
Yeah, sure. So my family came back. I have a picture of them at the airport, and then I have a picture of us, the house that I had leased. And
that's right. It was an apartment. I'm sorry, I misspoke.
That's fine. The other story that I'll mention real quick is we're only 15 minutes from the airport. When they were coming, I told my dad, "Let's go." It was me and my parents that were going to go pick up the family, and my dad says, "Oh, we got time," and I said, "No, we got to go." And we got there, and you know how you kind of want to be at the airport when someone comes through the terminal.
Of course.
I got there, my family was already there looking for their luggage, and I was like, "Oh, I missed this moment."
Yeah.
But like the thing that I'll never forget is the embrace that I had with my wife. That was a pretty precious moment.
Yeah.
But so we had that, and then we all moved in. Kids did the normal COVID during school, or this long, school during COVID. And my wife and I spent like the next year looking for a house because we all know what the housing market was like the past year. And then not until March this year did we find a house, and we got a home. And my joke was that so the house we bought is literally like 3 minutes from the house that we were rented. And so my joke was this move was shorter than the last move we made. And I kind of said, that's on purpose, guys.
Yeah.
But yeah, we're in a home. We love the home we're in.
Your first home, right? The first home you've ever owned.
Yep. My wife doesn't like to tell people that because she thinks she's too old to own a home for the first time.
Oh, stop it. It makes my American dream theory so much better. So
there you go. But look, we both love the home we're in. And we're happy.
Yeah. Well, I am certainly happy for you, and it's been fun to be a witness to at least the last couple of years as to how this has developed, because it's for the most part, it's an immigrant story. It really is. You were gone for so long that it became an immigrant story. And I love that so much. I consider myself a patriot. And again, back to the whole immigrant thing, when immigration is done in the United States, it's like a nod to America's history. It's a melting pot to things of the past and other cultures and countries. So I think it's awesome.
Yeah. The only difference, I guess, would be that even my wife was born here, and so she's got her U.S. citizenship. And then when we came back, I made sure everybody does. So I call it like immigration, but not, because we're all Americans. And
immigration with an asterisk,
right? But yeah, I still I grew up here for 25 years, so this is home.
Yeah.
But then I remember meeting a colleague at a customer's place, and she says, "Where are you?" And I said, "I'm just here in the car park." And she laughed at me. She says, "What's a car park?" So I still have my little Australian lingo, and then I just remember, oh wait, I did live there for 15 years. I do talk a bit different sometimes.
Sometimes, dude, you still have an accent.
I don't hear it, Mike.
Okay. All right. Now, think back about all this change, because we talked about a lot of it over the last 40 minutes. Think back to some of the tools that you have in your tool belt to be able to cope with the change. What kind of goes through your head during some of these changes? And you might not even know the answer to this, but what I'd really like to understand is, what coping mechanisms do you have? How do you center yourself? What do you do?
See, the funny thing is, if I could live somewhere different every few years, I wouldn't mind. And again, I don't like to have the same job. So maybe I like change because I don't like, if I was stuck in the same job for very long, I like to change that.
And that's something we haven't talked about before, is people who enthusiastically love change. And maybe you fall under that category after all.
Yeah, I don't mind it. But I think when you talk about tools, that makes me think, because I sit there and think, oh, what kind of tools do I use? Like I said, one of them, there's different books that I've read that I don't remember who wrote it, but like that book, Who Moved My Cheese? I like that book. How to Win and Influence Friends, Dale Carnegie. I like that book. So I can't say that I've slowed down on my book reading, but when it comes to self-help books or books like that, I think those are great. Do I need to read them more? I do. But I just think again, I'm always going to go back to it. Attitude and positivity, because I just think that it's a choice. I can wake up in the morning and choose to be grumpy about my situation, about my circumstance, or I can wake up in the morning and think, it is what it is, but how am I going to make today good? The only hard part was, like, Christmas or flight cancelizations or Prime Minister canceling stuff. When I had no control, that's challenging when you got no control. But just keep in mind, you might not have control over that, but there's still something you do have control over. So make positive of the things that you do have control over.
Great advice. And if you're in the market for a new book to read, I heard there's one called A Pro Wrestler's Guide to Confidence that it's a pretty good one. So
I need to check that one out, don't I?
I heard it's pretty good. I don't know. Amazon tells me it's pretty good. All right, man. Well, hey, listen. Any closing comments at all? I appreciate you coming in, but I also want to give you the platform if there's anything else that's come up to be able to continue to spread the word about managing change.
Look, I just appreciate you having me on. I think it's one of those things where I talked about before. Sometimes in your own life you don't realize the things you do or the things you don't do, and so when you spoke to me before, I was like, oh, I guess that does ring true for my own life, right? But it was just nice to be here. Nice to have a chat. The other thing that I don't know if it's just a phrase or a saying, but the one constant in life is change. And so the one thing that we cannot get around, it will happen to everybody, is change. And I think it's the one thing I like to think about is, when you talk about adversity or trials or goals, sometimes they happen to us or sometimes we create them. And I say we create them is if you want to say to yourself, hey, I want to train to do this, or I want to go to this college, or I want to start this job, you're creating that challenge that you need. However, sometimes if you get an illness or if you get laid off or if you get in a car accident, then challenge is created not by you, but you're in the mix of it. So it's just kind of keeping your eye. Hey, are you going to create your challenge, or is challenge going to find you? And then how are you going to find your way out of it?
It's great. A lot of that hits home, as you know.
Yep.
But hey, listen, I certainly want to say thank you for a lot of things, but mainly today, just coming along with me on this journey and sharing your story with everybody. It means a lot you were able to do it, and thank you for being here.
Thank you.
Again, I can't thank Hans enough for, again, humoring me in my endeavor to do a podcast. He just had such a great story, and I wanted all of you to hear it and be a part of it and hopefully be inspired by it, because I certainly was. So thank you, Hans. It means a lot that you did that for me. You're a good friend. All right, everybody, a couple of housekeeping things before I turn you loose. You can find me on most of the social medias at A Wrestler's Guide. You can head on over to my website at prowrestlersguide.com, and there you will find the link to purchase my book, which is still doing pretty well, by the way. The book is there. Merchandise is there. I've got another new T-shirt coming out this fall, I hope. I've got a great artist who's working on another Cowboy Gator McGraw shirt, and it's so far I've seen just a small snippet of what's to come, and he's really good. So that will be on a T-shirt soon. If you're looking for a speaker at one of your events, please email me at support@prowrestlersguide.com, and I will work something out with you. Mention to me that you heard me advertising this on my podcast, and I'll cut you an even better deal. Schools, businesses, anywhere you need a speaker, we can work something out. And I think that about wraps us up. I cannot wait for Halloween. I know I've said that before, and this is like the official, unofficial Halloween episode. So it's not that spooky, but maybe next year. I've got a lot more planned before we wind down 2022 when it comes to this podcast. And I guarantee that I will have, at a minimum, one more episode to drop this year. I did get a new job, and I'm trying to learn that job. I'm a director of sales and marketing for a company now, and I am very, very busy, much busier than I've ever been, which is a good thing. But the frequency of this podcast in its infancy was going to be twice a month, and I realized very quickly that this is a very big job. So I pumped the brakes a little bit, and I said once a month will be good. And now that I'm, in this new role, it's very demanding, and I still want to be able to get episodes out pretty regularly. So now maybe it's kind of tipping on that every 6 weeks or so. I'm just going to pump these out as often as I can. And I just appreciate all of your support, either watching the video and subscribing, and or you're listening to it and you're also subscribing on that platform. It means a great deal to me. For you to come along with me on these journeys is pretty important. So thank you for hanging out with me, tagging along with me, and I hope to talk to all of you very, very soon. Take care. Bye-bye.